Well, thank you for coming. Welcome. I'm going to give a little intro for our friends who are watching that may not be familiar with you as much. This is Jake Lavette. He performs as Clavette. He's an LA-based DJ producer, composer, and has releases on many labels, including Tool Room and Sima Black. He's got a decidedly French house and disco sound, originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I will admit to never having been there, but I like to know how different cities like to get down. So we're going to talk a little bit about origins and background and stuff. So tell me what the house scene's like in Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, I mean, it's been a while since I lived there, but when I was there in kind of right after college, so this would have been like 2010 to 2012, it was a lot of like you had a lot of like the progressive house, kind of a less so Swedish House Mafia kind of stuff, you know, the big pop kind of crossover stuff of the time that was still really big there. There was a really big electro sound, I remember at that time. And now I think it's like, I feel like it's always got a lot of the big names from what's current. So I think right now in dance music, there's a lot of tech house. So I see a lot of those people coming through. There's a lot of kind of the kind of bigger EDM guys that I'll see come through Madison and Milwaukee. But, you know, I think Milwaukee always has been, there is a music festival called Summerfest that I think has always been kind of cutting edge as far as like newer music that maybe doesn't reach the Midwest as soon as it reaches the coast. And so Summerfest, you'll see anyone from when I was in college, it was Pretty Lights, you could see, I remember Soulja Boy was there one year. So, I mean, it's pretty eclectic taste, and the city is pretty eclectic in its music taste as well. So, but the house music scene has always been kind of something one kind of cool note about Milwaukee as far as dance music goes is Daft Punk's first North American show ever was played in Milwaukee at this techno festival. And I was actually playing a show in San Diego not too long ago. And I was actually talking to a guy who was at that because he was from Chicago originally. And so he was like, yeah, I was at that show. So he had a lot of great stories. But so, yeah, originally from Milwaukee, and that's kind of where I developed my taste for the music and then kind of developed my sound when I moved to LA.
Have you played back home?
I did when I was younger, but not since. The scene is like, as far as like the people involved in the scene have changed or have moved elsewhere and are in different positions. So I don't really know that many people in that world anymore.
Yeah. Well, switching gears to Los Angeles, which is where I'm originally from and where you are now, I stopped DJing before I left LA. So like, I don't even know what's going on there. So at some point I'll have you catch me up on what's going on there. So you relocated to LA in 2013. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I moved out here shortly after college. It was a big change. I had never really, the only real big metropolitan city I'd seen was Chicago, just by proximity. So I knew nothing about LA. I moved out and went to the Icon Collective School of Music. I can't remember what it was called. It was just called Icon Collective back then, but now it's an accredited college. So I think it's the School of Music. And that was kind of where I went from kind of bedroom DJ producer, kind of learning everything on my own, to having some instruction and kind of learning maybe not so much the right way to do things, but maybe how things are generally done, and kind of learned how to break the rules once I kind of knew what they were. Because up to then it was just YouTube and, articles I could find on the internet. But yeah, it was really fun moving out here because it was right out of college. I moved in with all these other creatives, and we kind of just were all doing different things. Some of us were doing music, some of us comedy, some of us video production. So we kind of
everybody from Milwaukee, or
we're all from the Midwest, but not all from Milwaukee.
These college buddies, maybe?
One of them was, and then the other, it was all kind of friends of friends. Someone had like someone that connected each person here, but we kind of started doing all these different things because we could. I could produce music for a film that my buddy could license something from me for one of his things. We could have, I could DJ for my buddy's comedy show, and we kind of all put that together. And so we just kind of started creating kind of a community around these shows that we were putting on, which was mostly music and comedy. And which is kind of, you don't see that often, you know what I mean? At least,
I want to say it influences the stuff that you post on your social media, because you're definitely like, you don't have a problem poking fun at yourself, and
right.
There's a sense of humor behind all of it, which I appreciate.
I think that's totally fair. I think that's definitely rubbed off from one of my good friends who was the comedian. And so I learned that you can be self-deprecating. You can poke fun at your scene. You can kind of poke fun at what you're doing. You don't have to be so serious. Whereas other things maybe you do. But yeah, that's a long-winded answer to me moving out here.
We're here for long-winded answers.
Yeah.
So what part of LA are you in, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm in Highland Park. Okay. And then before then had been living mostly on the west side, but I think in the pandemic we wanted to get away from the crowd. I mean, all of LA, is crowded. It's very dense, but out here it feels a little different. There's a little more, it's slower. It's not so noisy.
Yeah, Highland Park is, and definitely there's more green spaces. Mm-hmm. I'm from Redondo Beach originally, so I can get away from the crowds out by the ocean.
Yeah, that's great. So we moved out here kind of in the middle of the pandemic, and I've been loving it. Yeah.
So what's your involvement in the music scene in LA right now, or what has it been consisting of in the midst of the pandemic and all that?
A lot of it right now is I'm doing a lot of my own music and then producing events. And then we started a record.
Top Shelf Disco?
Top Shelf Disco is the record label that I started with some friends. And some of the events I'm throwing is through that group. And then my wife has worked in event production, kind of experiential marketing, working with brands for quite some time now. And we both kind of shifted away from, she was working for a company. She's since gone more freelance, and I was doing a lot more commercial work in the past. And we've both kind of connected on the events, because we can do it so easily. I can be the DJ. And these aren't all house music events either. I really have an, affinity for the Blog House era, the kind of indie dance bands of that time. So running some kind of more format parties where the music is kind of nostalgic and to a certain era. So we're running some parties like that, along with Top Shelf Disco, which is the record label that I started with, kind of a producer DJ collective that I work with out here. And we've been starting to throw some of our own events, and those are kind of fun. And, we will often encourage people to dress up in disco because it's in the name. Yeah. It's not always the music being played. And that's why we've kind of come up with the slogan, it's not your dad's disco, it's not your mom's disco. It's this new kind of form of house influenced kind of disco. We call them disco themed costume parties fueled by house music. Okay. How's that?
Okay. What kind of venues are you doing those events in?
We've done a few events out here in LA, one at this area called venue called Catch One. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
And then we threw the second iteration of it down in San Diego at this new place called Revel. And I think with both of those, we've had really good experiences. And I think we're still just trying to figure out, is the costume thing the thing we want to do? Is that what we want to be known for? Or do we want to start kind of booking more headlining talent? And that's kind of what we're exploring right now. We have a lot of experience between the five of us in this group. So I think that there's a lot of people that are rooting for us in the industry and want us to kind of, do some really cool stuff. And so we're starting to use some of that network that we have at, maybe Sound Nightclub or some of the people we know at Insomniac, to see if we can maybe partner with them on some events and throw some more, headlining talent kind of shows that we can book ourselves on, and also kind of make more of a name if we were able to bring, an upcoming artist that maybe not everyone is booking right now in Southern California. So that's
cool. The idea of breaking some talent and being a kingmaker in LA would be a very cool thing.
I think we see, especially with Top Shelf, we see our sound kind of trying to bring a little more soul back into house music, especially when I think Yeah, right. I think a lot of the West Coast sound right now, and like I just think the predominant sound in dance music has been kind of very bass heavy party music. And not that there's anything wrong with that, because I think that there's for every moment there is a good time to throw one of those records on.
Yeah.
But I think that for the music that we make as a collective, and the music that we play in our sets and champion, it's a little more, the Tool Room records, kind of Defected records, a little more soulful, a little less aggressive, maybe. My buddy, who's one of the founders of Top Shelf, loves to say it's vibey music, man. And that's, I think, what it really is. It comes down to that. Yeah.
So if you had your pick of, creating a residency for Top Shelf Disco, what venue would that be at in LA?
I think sound, because have you been to Sound?
I have.
So but I have. In my opinion, it's one of those, like, it's just like the epitome of like a forward thinking nightclub. Everything from the lighting to the way it's positioned. They can also do these, it's like this long room, but then they can make it a short room by just moving the the booth to this kind of other area.
Sure.
And they'll do that to switch up things and keep it fresh. Sometimes you'll be kind of
have
more
less pressure to fill a massive room. Maybe you're bringing in your new person who hasn't been broken in LA yet. And so you don't have to have the pressure of filling that entire long room when you shorten things up a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think that I always just thought they were just trying to give you a different perspective of like, versus a long kind of crowd you're standing in versus a shorter crowd, but maybe that's it too. I'm sure that all plays into it. But I think that's somewhere where some of the collective has thrown parties before, and rather successful.
You're in there.
Yeah, one of the Racket Club, a good buddy, John Gilman, he brought the San Francisco-based party called Pizza and Techno down here, and they threw avid sound for quite some time. And
is there actual pizza?
There is pizza, yeah.
Right.
It's pizza and techno. Of course, there's got to be some pizza. But I think that is probably one of the leading candidates, and we're starting to kind of work through what it would look like to do a party there, or some sort of maybe residency and an off night. And so talking with them has been fruitful, and I think most of it is on our end, organizing and trying to find some talent that we can bring in there on maybe a Thursday night and, pack the place out.
Right on. So what are things looking like in LA now? I know, California was one of the most tightly locked down for a good long while there. Is it wide open now, or people kind of getting slowly back to it, or is it full on?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that there's, everyone has like a different threshold with comfortability right now with the pandemic. Yeah. And so I think you can see that the mandates have been lifted as far as indoor mask mandates. So now, if you walk into a coffee shop, they still might ask you to wear a mask, but now you have at least the option to show them your vaccination card and they'll allow you to take that off. Some places don't even check. I think it really just comes down to the person, in charge of the business or the person entering the business.
Yeah.
So you see mask wearing still, and you see some people not. And I think that as far as the nightclubs gone, those have felt like pretty back to normal, at least in my opinion, for a little bit of time now, which has been good. Because that was, I think, for someone who like lives in clubs, especially having not had that luxury for like the last 2 years, it's really good to see that the industry as a whole is kind of like back on its feet, and pushing forward. So we're entering summer, it's going to be a lot of outdoor festival kind of gigs coming up. So I think that should ease maybe anyone else who hasn't gotten super comfortable yet being in a crowd. Hopefully that gets them back into being comfortable again, and we can kind of all dance on an open grassy field somewhere out in Los Angeles. Yeah.
So who have you seen since things have started to open back up?
Well, so I went to Cross Festival this last weekend, and that is an institution that I've never been. So that was my
I
first.
haven't been, but one of my girlfriends is diehard, and she actually just texted me the other day who she went to see and everything. She just loves
Yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, I think it's hard to say it's boutique because it's a partnership with Golden Voice, and they do it at this kind of smaller park down in San Diego where they're booking Deep Dish and.
Do me a favor, set the scene for people because a lot of the folks will be watching this are in the UK. So kind of tell them what it looks like, what that scene looks like down in San Diego.
100%. So San Diego is, I think if you're ever visiting San Diego, there's kind of one of two places you might be spending your time. You're either going to be spending it downtown, around like the Gaslamp district, which is, very metropolitan. It's downtown, but then you get views of the ocean and the bay that it's kind of sitting on. The airport kind of right there. So you're seeing planes kind of flying in and over these buildings constantly. Or you're spending kind of your time in Pacific Beach, which is kind of more of like the loungy, beachier crowd. It's a little younger too, because there's not so much of the business district is kind of downtown. But Cross kind of takes place in that downtown area. So the way I was thinking of it was a lot of like Lollapalooza, which is in the heart of Chicago. So you're kind of staying in a hotel versus camping out, and you're just walking to the festival. It's right there. So you walk kind of in, so it's amazing because you're like surrounded by, I wouldn't say skyscrapers because San Diego's, they have, pretty big apartment buildings. I would say there's nothing that's giant, kind of like Los Angeles' downtown, but you have, big apartment buildings on one end, and then you have the beach and the waterfront kind of on the other side. And then, like I said, the airport is right there. So you're watching like your favorite DJ or band, and there's like planes coming down and landing behind them. So it's kind of this amazing scene. The sound is very, I would say I think it's getting more eclectic because I think it sounds like they're starting to book some more kind of like electronic pop crossover acts. Sophie Tucker was playing, Glass Animals was playing. But then you have kind of these like Frank Moody and these kind of indie dance bands that are making like almost like new disco, stacked
Blew
on top.
Your mind.
Yeah. Well, I loved Frank Moody. I've been trying to see them for a bit. I've been a huge fan I've been following Parcels for a long time, another band that played there. They were, I think Daft Punk produced a couple of their earlier singles, but then you get like the techno crowd, you get like Drum Crowd, and you've got Adam Bayer and Jeff Mills and, Nina Kravitz was playing. And then you have, kind of your old house heads and kind of newer tech house DJs. Anyone from Felix the Housecat to Solardo was there this weekend. And those were some of those. I mean, I think Solardo was probably one of my favorite kind of club shows from the weekend. Frank Moody stole my heart with all the disco. And then I had my face blown off by Jeff Mills and Adam Bayer at the techno stage. So you can kind of, and it's such a small little area. You can get from one end to the other really fast. So, you can pop in for 15 minutes. You could pop over to another place for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But that's fresh on my mind. And it was just, I was blown away by it. So, any UK viewers right now, if you ever have a chance to check that one out, it's pretty special, I think. And they run it twice a year. So you've got a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. So is there anything that's sort of sticking in your ear that you immediately were like, I want to get home and tingle on the computer, like, play around? Yeah. What were you inspired by?
I think, so my sound a lot has been very kind of French house flavored right recently, where it's, I'm taking something that may sound like a disco record, some sample that I found and twisting that up. And so it's got a lot of, melody. It's not so bass heavy. And I think that is what was sticking with me after the festival. It's just a lot of these like bass, even just like stuff that is more house, kind of flavored and not so like tech house, but a lot of bass was playing this weekend. Trying to write some more kind of groovy house music, kind of that's not so maybe influenced by disco, which I think is kind of hard because it all comes from there. But Felix the House Cat's set was really inspiring to listen to. Just I mean, it's just from a DJ's perspective. I mean, he was just playing everything, stuff that didn't even really sound like house music, which I thought was kind of refreshing. Someone had taking a chance.
Yeah.
I watched Fortet probably take the most chances I've ever seen. Just guy played Vanessa Carlton into trap, into drum and bass, and then into house music. I've never seen someone with such range.
Genre flip, and
it was incredible. So I think like that too, just like trying to explore more influences outside of maybe just like disco and R&B that I'm like kind of used to right now. Mm-hmm. And I think like songwriting too. There's a lot of vocally driven songs that I heard that, I think anybody, the quickest way to like a listener's soul is like a lyric and a melody, right? So I think that has been on the back of my head since Cross.
So I've read your bio and you mentioned French house revival. So will that always kind of be a part of your sound? It sounds like maybe after this experience, you're thinking away from that a little bit, but.
A little bit. I'm always trying to find a way to like get that sound to cut through more. And I think that the way I need to do it is like mashing French house with kind of what has always worked in these, club sets or festival sets at these festivals, which is like a little more bassy, heavy, groove oriented stuff. And so I think that I'm always going to be blending that with my French house kind of roots. I think really when I kind of talk about that, because I talk about it a lot because it's really the sound that kind of brought me into music production in general. Okay. But I'm always just trying to get that sound to be more forefront in the minds of listeners right now, and almost like educating, I guess, by like always kind of reaching for sounds from that kind of era, or
well, I mean, it's been 25 years since Homework, right?
Right. So
there's a whole generation of people that have never had any exposure to it.
Right. Which is wild.
Did you by chance catch the live stream of that concert at the Mayan?
I did. Yeah. And it was, I think only maybe a month before that I had been watching I think Rollin' and Scratchin', the music video of the official music video for that song was from that show. So I had seen kind of some clips in the past, but just watch that whole thing and just see what they were doing with all these drum machines and synthesizers 25 years ago. It's pretty phenomenal, all just being synced by a couple MIDI clocks and things like that. But even on that record, like they have, their French house kind of sounding stuff with like Revolution 909. And then they have complete like chaotic techno with, Rollin' and Scratchin' and a little bit with Burnin', like these kind of wild sounds that it's just them, from their punk rock youth and influences, just like turning these knobs on synthesizers and guitar pedals until something.
And totally rocking out.
Yeah. And I think I think a little bit of that was definitely coming through in this past weekend with some of the techno sounds I was hearing, just like these crazy sounds, trying to maybe bring that into what I'm doing with the French house revival stuff.
Have you listened to the remixes of the Homework 25th anniversary?
Yeah. So those I believe were issued like around like Roger Sanchez and like Ian Pooley and those ones. I've been listening to those for a long time.
Do you have a favorite?
I think so. I did a little thing on Instagram Reels and I made this piece of content that was like my 4 favorite tracks from Homework. And I got a lot of people saying the Roger Sanchez Revolution 909. And I do like that one quite a bit. I think yeah. Well, it's cool because you actually hear the a cappella that apparently never made the original record, because there's always this acapella that you see in that package, and it's just Revolution 909, but you never hear that in the original one.
Yeah.
Ian Pooley's one is, I think of, what record is that? Trying to remember. But Ian Pooley's remix of, which one was it? Burnin'. Yeah, that one's a great one. The motor bass stuff, which is like, I think half of Cassius is good. Ken Liu's remix of Around the World is also awesome. And I mean, you can't go wrong with DJ Sneak. I mean, there's so many good ones. Masters at Work is also, or no, that's Raw.
Masters at Work did so many. I mean, in their various forms. Ken Liu.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, I guess I didn't realize.
They did like 5 or something.
Yeah, there's so many that came out. But I guess this is the first time, because I don't remember them putting out a remix album. It was like EPs for the singles, right? So I think that this might be the first that they've all lived on one disc, which is pretty cool.
So switching gear to your music specifically, we've talked a little bit about what your influences are. In a few sentences, you describe, like, in a nutshell, what the clavette sound is.
Yeah, I've always kind of, it's like unapologetic kind of popular music influenced, and that is like, but with like this raw kind of edge to it. What do I mean by that? Like I've worked in the pop world for a bit, and so I feel like I'm always drawn to like catchier melodies, maybe stuff that's a little more poppy.
You write jingles in your day life, your day job, right?
I do some jingles. Yep.
Does that influence your what you do in your own music?
I think maybe not all music, but like most music that I've been fortunate to work in, sounds at least in different kind of capacities, has been, you got to have some sort of melodic hook. And so there's always like a hook that I'm looking for, whether that's a lead vocal, whether that's some sort of melody that's played on a synth or a guitar or on a string line. I would say that I'm very melodically driven that way. And then so there's like kind of these two whole spectrums, I think, of my sound, where it's like that kind of stuff, which is very pop oriented. It's very melodic, and it's bright and it's colorful. And then there's kind of the other side of it that's a little darker. It's a little rougher. It's a little rough around the edges. And I think that there's been a couple times where I think I've really hit the middle of that. Like there's a record I did.
Yeah, tell me the tracks that you feel like you really achieved what
I did a record with a friend of mine, and his name, he goes by Dutch East, and this record actually was picked up by Peloton, and it's been in their rotation on a few of their workout classes recently, called Up and Down. And I think that record has everything. Like, it has the energy and kind of the roughness that I kind of associate with some of my darker material, but then it has a lot of melodic kind of content that kind of pulls it kind of like brings you into these moments of less kind of, pumping house music and a little more kind of relief almost. And then there's kind of this crazy moment at the end of the track where it just like the energy just becomes insane. And I think like also the hook, the vocal is this woman just kind of come and say up and down. And it's like so simple that I'm kind of like blown away, because sometimes I can be not so simple, and I think things need to be complex. And I think that's like the battle that any artist or creative goes, with. They're kind of like battling their older version of their process or something like that. And I think that,
or their ego that we tell ourselves it needs to be,
right. So I think
grandiose thing, right?
I think that was a track that just I just
Just
was
worked.
flowing. It just worked, and I was flowing, and I just followed where my inspiration was going.
So was that a quick one to put together then, I'm guessing?
Yeah, and the story behind that one is crazy too. When we'd been trying to get together to work, he's from Seattle originally and been kind of going back and forth between there and LA. And this was right before the pandemic, on the day that Kobe Bryant actually died. So we were sitting kind of writing the record, and we had some ideas going, and then I just get a text from my wife that Kobe Bryant had died. And so it was a very weird day, obviously, because I think the whole world stopped.
Yeah.
And I think we had most of the song done by the end of that day. And I don't know whether that was because we were just had these emotions maybe pouring out into the song from this other thing kind of happening. But it was finished pretty quickly, and that's typically a good sign, at least in my experience. Another record I'm really proud of was this EP that I did via Lefty, my good buddy from Brooklyn, his new record label called Quincy Boy Records, and that was all French house inspired. Like I created my own samples, so to speak, disco samples, by working with Lefty, who's a really great guitarist and bass player, or kind of just making the sounds feel like they were older through different production techniques, and just made a complete French house record. And it was cool to see in some of these reports, when you have a record that you're promoting, there's typically some sort of campaign to send it out to all these DJs. And a lot of the feedback we got from DJs was that oh, wow, this is an American French house artist. That's pretty cool. Like, people were seeing it, getting it, they
heard what you were putting down, what your intention was.
So I think that those, both of those have moments of kind of that compromise between like the commercial pop melodic hook kind of stuff and kind of the rougher around the edges underground music that I really like. So I think those are two projects that really I try to emulate maybe with what I'm going, moving towards and forward with. But at the same time, I'm still trying to always add a little something extra to every track or every record I'm working on, and try and push myself. Because I think if you just get locked into one creative process, you're never going to create anything. If you just, if you're not learning every time you're writing a record, you're just going to get stuck in your old ways. And that's not somewhere I want to be. I don't want to be in that feedback loop of just recycling everything I've done before.
Yeah. So you released something in January on Midnight Riot, which I think probably most of the people who watch this will be very familiar with that label, called You Better Live It. It's, I would say, uplifting new disco jam by yourself and Bubs, featuring Lee Wilson on vocals. You got a remix by Mark Brickman and the man Yamhu himself and Disco Sparks. How did that project come together? What was the process of getting it signed to Midnight Riot?
Sure. So Bubs and I had been talking for a bit. We just kind of connected online. We both had done the Tool Room Academy at some point, and I think that community is connects pretty seamlessly. Like, everyone kind of feels like one big family. So we started talking about working on some records, especially someone who I had identified as being very influenced by disco, and he's French disco. So there's it's like a whole. It just felt like these worlds colliding, and we had a lot of great influences and ideas on what we wanted to write, which was like a modern day disco record. And we had, I think, some ideas when we reached out to Lee to see if he would be interested in working on the record, and he was. And I think you
wrote this in the middle of the pandemic, right?
Yeah, I was living on the other side of town at this time too. I remember we just had, it was a very basic beat with some chords, and Lee just wrote this whole thing in a matter of a couple days. Like I even think it was just like one day he just sat down, which like shows you how prolific his process and creative ability is. And from there, I think me and Max Bubs just passed the project back and forth until we had something we were both super happy with. And there was some compromises on both of our ends, and kind of being like, well, I think it needs to go this way and this way. And I think that we were both like very committed to making sure we both were really happy with the record, and we were both kind of hitting this sound that is what we kind of set out to do. So once we finished it, we kind of sat on it for a while. There were some things on my end that I was trying to line up because I think we had some really big ambitions for like the record, and we wanted to make sure that both of our projects were in a space where a label might look at us and say, these are artists that we can invest in because they have things going for them. And I think I'm glad, in hindsight, I'm glad we waited, because Bubs had a lot of great records come out. I had a lot of great records come out in between finishing You Better Live It and when it was actually signed to Midnight Riot. And so I think that time, Andy at Yam-Hoo from Midnight Riot was able to see kind of like, what we were about. Because I think when we finished it, neither of us had that many records out. So between finishing the record and signing it was about a year or so, maybe even longer. And we got connected through a good friend of ours, Boogie Tracks, who I've also worked with and also have a record coming out with him on Midnight Riot.
I was going to ask, do we get to talk about that?
We can talk about that. But that was, it was really cool because Andy's just like, he's such a laid back guy. He's, been doing this for so long. He really knows what he likes. And we got a lot of really good feedback on that record. And then, having him ask for stems and have that record remixed by him and, another kind of disco don in Mark Brickman was awesome, because I love the record me and Max wrote. It's such a jam, but I think for me at least, it's always felt like a song more than like a club record. It's just, something I would maybe play, at the gym or something, or, walking around. It's not necessarily something for my sets, even though I have played it a few times, but I think Mark and Yam-Hoo's version is just it's so much more geared towards, I think, a DJ set.
Dance floor.
Yeah, which was awesome, and having kind of that Italo disco sound a little more prominent in there was also awesome. And then Disco Sparks was like a complete like 80s, like early 80s kind of version of it, which just hit all those, for us, we had like this new disco sound and the Italo disco sound and that kind of early 80s kind of disco stuff with the drum machines. And so it just felt like this really kind of complete package. Yeah.
That's awesome. So I'll be honest, I hear not a lot of, but the original disco tracks that come out, in my opinion, are lacking something. I admire those who are willing to go out there and try to do something original, but a lot of it sounds like we're trying to redo something that was already done a long time ago, and it was done better back then. So how do you think one makes a successful original disco track in 2022?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it starts with the song. I think you need a great song. I think because I agree with you. I think like a lot of records, and I think it comes down to the process too. Like I think that whenever I see Defected do something, or Glitterbox and that kind of vibe, they go all in. Shapeshifters goes and hires like a whole orchestra, and they do the strings right. they have, you know, some of the best musicians on there. And I think that that's, not everyone has access to that.
Sure.
I think, you know, records that don't sound so cookie cutter, they try to at least maybe emulate that process of creation, and or try and go over the top with it a little bit more, or they just abandon all of that, and then, you know, they kind of hint at some of the sounds. Like, I think Purple Disco Machine is, you know, he's just hinting at the sounds back then, you know, and the grooves of back then. There's nothing about his process, I would say, that's like, you know, besides trying to maybe emulate some of the sounds, that is really from, you know, that kind of era. Like, nothing from Sal Soul or, you know, any of those Philadelphia, you know, Philly groups doing that great disco sound. But I think for like what me and Max have worked on, and then me and Boogie Tracks, like, I'm just trying to make something that's groovy. It's got a great song behind it. And if I can just add production that kind of lifts the record a little more, that's like a win for me, because I think like it does come down to the song so much.
Yeah.
I don't know, trying to think of like a disco record where it's just like an instrumental. And the only thing that's really coming to mind is like, trying to think of the record right now, but I don't even think that some of these records I'm thinking of have just an instrumental. There is actually, I will say, there's a party in LA that I play called The Hustle. And I found this group that did a disco cover of the Star Wars theme. It gets quite a reaction at this party. So maybe that might be the only thing I can think of that's just a straight instrumental track that really kind of like revs up the crowd.
Yeah. So let's talk. Can we talk about your track with Boogie Tracks on Midnight Riot? Tell me about it.
There's a few things we can say about that. Yeah. Really pumped about it. It should be here in April. And it's me and Boogie Tracks and this amazing singer-songwriter from Brooklyn called Amazonian Rockstar. And she's done some really cool stuff. She worked with LP Giobbi recently. She does these awesome kind of, I don't know if I don't know if it's burlesque, but it's kind of like really eccentric outfits. She sings in this troupe in New York, and she actually premiered the song there not too long ago. She sang it live for the first time, and it was fun working with her because I had to make like a track that worked for the live performance of it, which is like tough because she was like, I don't know where I come in if I don't have the vocal there. So we had to like create different, basically a kind of different section of the track so she knew where she was going to come, the lead vocal was supposed to come in. Mm-hmm. But it's similar to, I would say it's a little bit similar to You Better Live It, in the sense we were really trying to just like make like a modern day disco record. It's a little more on the Italo kind of vibe where it's a little more synth driven. There isn't really, I don't even know if there's a guitar in there, to be honest, but there's a little, I think what was fun was that Brandon's a great bass player, and, you know, watching him kind of like, I had like programmed like a bass line and then he kind of played it how you actually would. So we have, you know, some real instrumentation in there.
So he's in Austin, you're in LA. Were you guys physically together for this process?
We were.
Or you were doing it separately?
I think during like the writing process, there was a point where he was in LA, but we weren't able to connect on music. We did have a show together, and I remember playing it at that. So maybe the song had been done. It was another one where like we finished
a pattern bar gig?
Yeah. Do you remember that? Were you here?
No, I just remember seeing, I was like, I've been there. I'm like, yay, people are playing. Those places still exist. That's good.
Yeah. Pattern bar's still there. Still chugging along. But I think this one was, I think, and the way Lee was so quick in his writing, this was a little bit of the opposite, where we really we're kind of like maybe almost over analyzing some of our production or like over analyzing some of the sections. But Nikki, or Amazonian Rockstar, she like, again, just blew us away with her talent. You know, she wrote like a verse, and then she was like, okay, and her schedule was just like all over. I think she's working with a lot of people plus her day job. And so we would get like the verse and we were like, we love this. And then she wrote the chorus like maybe a few weeks later, and we were like, this is amazing. And then she like wrote this incredible bridge that kind of tied it all together maybe like a month after that. And so it was a little bit of a longer process, but like it was interesting because like every time she would send us something, me and Brandon would kind of work on the production a little more and like kind of focus in on that section. So it was like, it was cool because it wasn't, you know, didn't have this pressure to finish the song all at once. Cause you know, we were waiting for Nikki to finish up certain sections. And then maybe we updated like a section once we had that new part. So it was like this kind of longer approach.
You were forced to the advice is like take some time away from the project, right?
Yeah, 100%.
You're actually forced to do it because of the timeline in which things were being delivered to you.
Yeah, and I think like because of that timeline, you know, we'd come back to the record like a week or two later and be like, do we like that? Do we want to change that? Do you want to mess with this now? In this one, I'm just going to open up the folder because this one was like a record that just had 9, 10, 11, 12 lives as far as like the production. Me and Brandon, so the only through line in this record is that there's a piano that samples what's his name? The Going Back to My Roots. What is his name?
Yeah.
He played at Woodstock, and I'm blanking on his name.
I know who you're talking about, but I am also.
But Richie Havens, excuse me. And then you know, there was like the disco version in the 70s of that same song by Odyssey. But so we originally sampled the record and kind of made like kind of a classic house tune, and then we weren't really loving it. We didn't have a vocal. We wanted to make like more of a disco record then, and that's when we got in touch with Nikki. And that's when then it completely changed. But there's like, I'm looking at it now, there's like 14 versions of this, or at least 14 project files I can see. So it was like, you know, it was a lot of time to analyze and figure out, you know, what do we like? What do we think? And I think that it aids a lot of artists because you kind of look at things more objectively rather than whatever emotional state you're in or how you're feeling about certain elements in the record. You're really just analyzing it because you've had some time to kind of like
separate yourself from it.
Yeah, 100%.
That's cool. So tell me what else is coming up. What should we be looking out for? You know, where are you playing out? What releases are coming? Yeah,
so the next record is actually coming out Friday, and this is a Top Shelf Disco. So it's like my debut on my label, on my own label, which has been we've been putting out some really great records, you know, meeting a lot of new artists and upcoming people. And so we're kind of excited to kind of build and grow with these artists. And so this record is that I have coming Friday is called Messing Around. It's another record I worked with this vocalist named Britta. She's really talented. We wrote this, and another kind of record where like this might go to show my just kind of Jekyll and Hyde. It sounded one way, and by the time we finished it, it sounded completely different. But it's kind of a piano house kind of vibe that I think is getting ready for summer, and really like our first real summer, I think, especially in LA, that will feel like we're completely back. So I'm really excited for that. You know, the boat parties, the pool parties. That record's coming Friday.
Nobody does a pool party like LA does a pool party. I gotta say, I really miss that. We don't really have that here in Atlanta.
Right.
Strange.
Well, so that one's coming Friday, and then the next one would be in April with Brandon and Amazonian Rockstar on Midnight Riot, and we're still kind of locking in the release date on that. But follow along if you want to check out that record. It should be here early April, I would imagine.
Okay.
And then as far as parties, I will be in Miami March 25th. Is that the 26th is the Saturday?
Week.
Yeah, I'll be there for most of that week, but I'm playing on the 26th with Deep Root Records, awesome label out of New York that I've really just like championed my sound since kind of I started, and really excited to play with that family of artists and people. And then there's another show I might be playing that still kind of working out the details with a friend of mine. And then really, I don't have too much after that, but like I said, we're working on some events with Top Shelf that I can't really talk about quite yet, but we're really hoping by kind of April, May to have one of our first kind of headlining talent shows. So talking with a few people right now and a few teams, and hopefully we'll have more information maybe the next time we talk, Lauren.
Okay, that sounds good. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This is Island Time. So this is the Island Time lightning round. We're going to ask you 3 questions, kind of more rapid fire style. Okay, so you're stranded, you're marooned on an island, but you actually get to pick the island. So where do you want to get stuck?
Oh man. I mean, I think Ibiza, right?
Okay.
Like easy.
So you get to, maybe you don't need to replicate any club. You get to replicate any club you want on the island. I assume that the club that you probably want is already on the island, but so what is that? Or if you want to transplant a club from somewhere else that you would be appropriate.
To be creative, but I think like having Paradise Garage or something on Ibiza would be really cool. Especially like since Glitterbox has like their own residency there. I think like that would be a perfect, like replicating that like energy and just like I would transport not only the club but like the time frame, right? Just like
and all the players,
New York,
the DJs, just give them the full history lesson in person, exactly. in real life. All right, I'm with it. Okay, so you're producing whatever you want to produce, except you only get to produce in 2 BPMs. What are they? It's this or that.
124 or like 118, like it's kind of slower. I think that's like, it's not a huge difference, but I think that tempo kind of dictates club kind of more oriented music versus like disco records.
Sure. Okay. Last question. You get to ask for advice from 3 different mentors. They can be living or deceased. Who are those 3 on how to live a good life?
Wow, that's a big one. I'm going to say mentors. I mean, I'm going to throw kind of 2 people into one. Like my grandfather and my father have always been hugely important in my life. So those are my like actual superheroes, like mentors, who a lot of like my life has been based around as far as like the lessons and morals of how to be a good person. We'll do someone from music and then someone else who I just kind of admire. I think from like music, like I'm trying to think who I've just really idolized as far as like sound, but I don't know. I want to say Kanye's coming to mind, but I don't know if I like want to take life advice from him. You know who is someone Tom York from Radiohead has always like, I've always looked like, I feel like those guys have always been center of attention, but never let the fame get to their head, and have always been somewhat normal. I don't think they've ever had any episodes or any crazy things happen. I will say I saw them when they did their little return tour and they played at Coachella. There was like giant engineering problems and they kept so cool through it. So like I would take life advice from those guys. Anybody, Johnny Greenwood or Tom York. And then someone I just respect and admire. Let's see. I don't know. This might be just because I feel like I see him all over social media, but I do kind of like a lot of what he says. Is Gary Vaynerchuk, entrepreneur, just like seems he's always like what I respect about him is he's just always like ahead of the curve. He's not afraid to say what he thinks, and he is generally incredibly positive, and positive with like candor and a lot of enthusiasm. And I think that especially working in entertainment in the nightlife industry, you got to be really positive even when times are shitty and like people are telling you no and nobody believes in it, or you feel like nobody believes in you.
Yeah.
And you got to have kind of candor and charm to kind of like get past those, gatekeepers in this industry. And just being positive and charming in general will get you a long way, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Right on. So anybody who watches this show knows that I'm about manifesting some shit.
There we go.
This is your wide open opportunity to tell the universe or whoever might be listening that you want to collaborate with so-and-so, you want to play at XYZ venue, you want to release on an XYZ label, like whatever.
All right, let's do it. So I believe in this as well. I do a lot of mine own. So I'll kind of we're approaching the end of the first quarter of the year, so I'll kind of like round out with some of the things I had on that kind of list of manifestations. So a few that haven't happened quite yet that I'm going to manifest right now. I'm going to have a record signed to either Perfect Havoc, Tool Room, or what was the other one? Glasgow Underground, before the end of March. And I'm hoping that will happen. There's a couple records that I have sent to these people that they're still considering. So hopefully that goes down. I think by the end of like the second half or the second quarter, basically once we get through halfway through the year, I'll have played at Sound Nightclub. I'll have thrown, I have a party that I throw called Mr. Brightside that is all kind of synth dance pop kind of rock and, Franz Ferdinand, The Killers, MGMT, that kind of stuff. I threw my first one in January and I'm running them quarterly right now, but by I think halfway through the year, I want to have some headlining talent, maybe like Classics play it. Those guys are some friends that I would love to have play that show from that era as well. And I think one other, I would love to work with an artist who I've really just respected for a long time, who I will work with by end of the year, is Norman Doré. Just a guy that I just think is doing French house revival in his own way. And I think that we would be able to create like a really big record that would really kind of show people what French house is all about.
Cool. All right. Okay, last thing. Where can people find you? All the socials, where can they find your music?
100%. You can find me at Clavette Music. I'll spell that for you guys. CLAV as in Victor, ETTE. That's my last name. You can find me at Clavette Music everywhere. Instagram, I'm pretty active. I've got kind of, if you want to come watch me get nostalgic and actually DJ in social media DJ content, come find me on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Spotify at Clavette, on SoundCloud too. On SoundCloud, you can find my little radio show that I put out every month. And I'm always like, I'm very content driven. So it's not all promotion. I'm trying to be entertaining. I'm trying to be someone who's, connecting to not only house music culture and disco and all that stuff, but like educate and be entertaining too. So it's not all promotion. I'm not always throwing records in your faces, my new radio show and playlist updates. There's all that, but there's a little bit more too. So you can come find me at any of those places.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Jake. I appreciate your time. Good luck with everything. I look forward to hearing about the actual manifestation of all these things we just discussed. And maybe we can have you on sometime later in the year too.
I'd love that. Well, thanks, Lauren, for having me on. This was a lot of fun. Brandon said it would be, and it definitely was. So thanks for having me on Island Time.
Thank you. Take care.